Okay.
Okay, so yeah, so I will start going live and let me hit the live button. Hopefully this works. Okay. Let me see it. It just copy the link to video. Let me refresh it. Oh, yes, it works. Okay. So yeah, thank you so much, Curtis, to be our speaker today. And yeah, I will pass the baton to Curtis. Curtis is the co-founder of The Void, and I know we have a lot of people sign up, like if 80, more than 80 people sign up. So let's just dive into Curtis' kind of presentation. Yeah, thank you so much.
All right. Well, thank you so much for having me. Yes, let's just dive right in and chat about magic and experience design and how we can craft virtual wonders. Let's see. We're gonna share. Or we can. Oh, good. It's working now. All right. Make sure everyone can see that. We're good to go.
Yes.
All right. Beautiful. All right. So again, thank you so much for having me. Grateful to be here. I've had quite a history in both in magic design, experience design, visual effects, and story, and all these sort of came together to help create The Void. Just as a quick way of introduction, I'm a magician, I'm an experience designer, I'm an author. I wrote this book recently. Please feel free to check it out. This isn't a sales pitch. It's just, hey, if you want to learn more, then this is a thing that exists that you can check out. So let's dive into experience design and experience as a concept first. I've been all around the world. I've met a lot of famous people, and every time I do, I'm very conscious to say like, I'm not gonna get a picture, even if I want one. I'm like, I'm not gonna get a picture because I just don't want to be that guy. Sometimes I've made some exceptions, and this particular time I really did with this guy, who is Joe Rohde, just a legendary Imagineer, and I couldn't help myself. I'm like, Joe, I got to get a picture with you, man. I just think the world of him. He's an excellent experience designer, and he wrote something on experience design that I just felt was really captured it. And so it's something I not only he gave me permission to put in the book, but I thought I'd also share it here. It's this: experience is a record of relationships between things that happen in the world, your body's reception of the impulses created by that thing that happened, and the formation in your brain of the story you tell yourself about what happened. Since the last part of that sequence is the main part you are aware of, that means experience is a narrative event. It is what we tell ourselves happened. Our brain is a predictive organ. In order to save on recognition time and the expenditure of energy, it creates models and scripts which are used to anticipate what is going to happen so that we can react and survive. That means that in many cases, the brain model circumvents any actual experience of the real world at all. You could go out to dinner, sit at a table for an hour, walk away, and 5 minutes later be unable to describe a drinking glass that you used for the entire evening because you never really experienced the glass at all. Only a reasonably usable behavioral model called restaurant drinking glass. So, if you expect to create a memorable experience, you must, at the same time, provide an exceptional experience. Which is, of course, what we were trying to do at The Void. For those of you not familiar, The Void had locations, 22 different locations around the world. You'd show up, you'd get checked in, and you'd pick your experience. You go to a pre-show that would help set up what the experience was, and then you'd get suited up in a headset, backpack, and a haptic vest. From there, you and your team would go into an experience, stepping onto a physical set. There, you would feel heat, you would feel wind, you would feel haptics on your chest and beneath your feet. All the walls would be there. The physical props would all be there. We did everything we could to make the experience seem as real as possible so that you could high-five your friends and leave, just like in this video. Reality, it was all about trying to make these virtual worlds seem as real as possible. And in doing so, we created an exceptional experience. Because they weren't just, it wasn't like, hey, we're going to go take a walk in downtown Amsterdam, which I mean, why that could be fun, but it was like, hey, let's go live an impossible experience and make that impossible experience seem real. And that conflict there created magic. It created something that was truly exceptional. So how do we make XR in general exceptional, any kind of XR? So I thought I'd start by talking a little bit about how I'm currently going about designing experiences. This is a brainstorming method that I've been working with for a little while now. And it really is just a tool. It's not there to replace all experience design theory. It's just another screwdriver or hammer in your box that you can use to try and help form the beginnings of an experience. And I say experience very broadly because it is one of the, I think it was labeled as the most overused word of 2023. I mean, it's probably the most overused word of the last 2 decades, but maybe that's just my perception. But everything's an experience. The problem with that is that it's true, and it's not true all at the same time. Everything is an experience because we experience everything, but not everything's an exceptional experience, which is really, of course, what we're talking about. So when we want to design exceptional experiences, here's a method you can use. This was originally put together for immersive experiences, especially when it comes to like immersive theater or void experiences. But I've seen a lot of people use this method more abstractly to apply to any kind of XR or location-based design. So I thought I'd introduce it to you all if you're unfamiliar. This is the TISECT method. TISECT is just stands for theme, indexing, scaffolding, experiences, critical thought, and takeaway. And the goal is you go through each of these in order, and each one helps you lead into the next one, which leads you to the next one, into the next one, to the next one, to the next one. And by the time you're done, you have an outline for the beginnings of an experience. In this case, theme, well, I mean, you start with that. The underlying concept or threads that threads the narrative of the experience together, provides the foundation for the story and sets the tone for the entire experience. Indexing, this is like the intellectual property or IP or story that serves as a reference anchor for your guests. So it's something that guests recognize and helps them understand the world that they are entering. This can be like a licensed IP, but more often it's usually something from the public domain, or it's just something that's set there as inspiration. So you could say that like Tolkien and Lord of the Rings is the indexing for nearly every high concept fantasy that's ever existed, because they all reference and use his work as a way to index and help shape their worlds. It's a great way of helping to form an experience. Again, even if it's just as not as a direct thing, like I'm going to make an Alice in Wonderland experience, which like everybody does that, but I mean, go for it. Or you can use it as like, I want to make something that's whimsical and use Alice in Wonderland as an indexing reference frame. Next is scaffolding. This is using a common social structure that helps engage participants and guide their behavior, and it eases them into the experience. For example, an experience might start as a wedding, and most people understand what the social norms and the expected behaviors are at a wedding. And so it gets them to participate and engage with the experience because they're already familiar with the social structure that would be required of them in the beginning. And then you can use that beginning to help shape and move their expectations and their behavior into different paths of either of gameplay or even of the model use of like a UI or something else. Then we go into experiences. I talk a lot about this in the book, but basically you should definitely create an experience wish list. What are the things you would like the guests to be able to experience? Again, this is easy to do in immersive design. It's, you know, I want people to, could be anything. I'd love it if people could do a backflip into a ball pit. Like, I don't recommend doing that. It doesn't sound safe, but I mean, if that's on your wish list, then okay, put it down. That's an experience. For Ghostbusters, we had an experience wish list of, I want to get slimed by Slimer. I want to fight the Stay Puft Marshmallow Man. I want to capture a ghost. I want to destroy a room with a proton gun, a wand, I think they call it. But that was sort of our wish list of, here's the things that we really wanted to have happen. And we had our indexing and our scaffolding, and the scaffolding in that case in particular was that you were a rookie and this was your first day on the job. And so that created the shape and the form that allowed people to go into that experience. Critical thought. This is something, I don't know if, I don't know what other people might call it, but this is what I called it at the Void. This is the thing that got people into the experience by saying, this is who you are, and this is what you're doing. Okay, that's the critical thought. In Star Wars, you're a secret agent disguised as a stormtrooper, and you are trying to get to the crate. You want to see what's in that crate. That's the intelligence you're after. Okay, secret agent, look in the crate. And we repeated that several times. So we repeated it in the pre-show twice, and then as you're about to enter the experience, it's repeated again. I think K2SO says it to you. And we learned we had to do this because there's such an overwhelming sense in all kinds of XR where there's a lot of sensory input, and there's this media apathy that occurs where people are not cognizant of everything that's happening because there's so much information coming in. They're kind of overwhelmed. And so we would have to continuously hit this critical thought, because if they knew that critical thought, then they would have a good time in the experience. Like there was a direct correlation in our testing because they knew what they were doing. They had a North Star, something that was guiding them, like, oh, we got to do this thing. And that helped pull them through the entire adventure. And finally, the takeaway. What do you want people to get out of this? Okay, this could be a literal lesson like, oh, I learned the power of friendship, or it could be something physical like, oh man, I literally walked away not only with a sense of pride, but with this cool pirate patch. I have no idea, whatever your thing is. But it's like, what are they getting out of the experience? What are the guests taking away? And so you can use these things together to help form the outline for an experience. And as I started using this, I really enjoyed it. And of course, then GPT Plus came out with their way of being able to program GPT-4 in a sense. And I thought that was awesome. So I said, great, let's teach it to do this. So there is now publicly available my immersive experience designer. Anyone who has GPT Plus is welcome to try it out. I love it. You can give it 3 of the aspects, 3 of dissect, and it'll say, okay, well, here's suggestions for the other ones, or it'll give you you could just say, give me a completely random one, and let's see where we go. Or I want something that feels like this, and then it'll help you fill in the rest. Or you can give it almost everything and say, what suggestions do you have to make this better? And it'll do that. So it's really, if nothing else, fun to play with, but it gets you thinking in new ways, and is a great tool for experience design. So can post that somewhere. Hopefully people can find it.
I just share on the chat. So
Perfect.
yeah.
All right. So it's a brief overview of experience design. Let's hop into magic and how we can use magic to help with any kind of XR design. And obviously I speak from the immersive experience side, but like I say, there's a lot going on here. Magic, I think of this is the Conjurer by Hieronymus Bosch, from, I think it was like the 15th century, somewhere in there that this was made. Famous painting, but people don't really, I think, see magic this way. People usually see magic this way. This is an image given to me by Master Payne, a magician, Ren Fair magician, a really funny guy. But I agree with him. Like, this is, I think, more how people would perceive magic, and less like this, which is too bad, because there's so much that magic has to offer, especially when it comes to any kind of design work. Illusion is used in architecture, it's used in art, it's used in writing and in story, it's used everywhere. And magic happens to specialize in the art of illusion, and so learning more about it can help in so many various ways. So how can we use it? Let's talk about that. First, misdirection. How the world sees misdirection. Hey, look over there. And then, oh, fooled you. As if it was some sort of distraction, right? In fact, if you look it up, the definitions for it include to direct wrongly, to give wrong direction, the act of distracting. It's not that. A magician would describe it this way: that which directs the audience towards the effect and away from the method. Another way to look at that might be like this. You've got truth and reality on one side, and then you guide their perception over to a lie or a fantasy. That'd be a nicer way to put it. And so you're moving them from reality to fantasy by guiding their perception. Yeah. You could just be like, hey, I'm moving them from reality to virtual reality, and hopefully carrying their consciousness along with it, so that they believe in that virtual world as much as, or as close to as much as that reality, that real world as we can. There are two types of misdirection. There is controlling how information is received. That's physical misdirection. And there's controlling how information is processed. That's psychological misdirection. There's a lot of taxonomies on misdirection out there. I like this one because it's simple. It's I think, very clear and easy to understand. An example would be a floating ball. Magician on stage makes a ball float up in the air, and you're sitting in the audience and you go, hey, wow, floating ball, right? Like your brain goes, wow, floating ball. But then it goes, I mean, stuff doesn't really float, right? The inputs to your eyeballs and into your brain say, hey, look, that ball looks like it's floating. That's incredible. But your mind thinks, well, I mean, stuff doesn't float. So how's he doing that? It's got to be strings, or it's got to be magnets, or what is it? You know, he's got something, what's going on there? And so the magician knows that you're thinking about this stuff. So he takes a ring or hoop and he passes it over the ball, and maybe puts the ball in a big clear box, or does whatever he can to prove that there is nothing connected to that ball. And so now you're left with a conundrum. You're like, well, I mean, it looks like it's floating. And then your mind goes, I mean, nothing's connected to it. Now, this isn't a big conscious process necessarily. It could all just happen in just a few moments very quickly. But the end result is this sense of astonishment. It's like, whoa, that is a floating ball. And stuff in your normal reality doesn't do it. But your perception's been carried over here to this reality that is a lie or a fantasy. And it seems real. And that's why it's magical, right? So it just goes back to Joe Rody again, right? There's this information you get and the story you tell yourself about what happened, and that story becomes that magical moment, right, between the combination of physical and psychological misdirection, thanks to the convincers and the little arguments that the magician makes to help guide that perception. So we used a lot of magic in the Void over the years. In Avengers, we definitely used a lot of magic principles, particularly in this scene with Doctor Strange. This was a great experience. We got actually the voice, the actual celebrities come do the voices of their characters. This was in the heyday of Marvel, and it was awesome that they came back to do it, and everybody really put their kind of their hearts into the production of this thing, and to make it as authentic as possible. It was great seeing Benedict Cumberbatch act as Doctor Strange, with just covered in motion tracking dots, and sort of reprising that role for us. And the key here was it being as authentic as possible. This idea of concordance, okay, that the expected reality is what you're being given, even in impossible circumstances. So the power of concordance is something that I like to talk a lot about, because there's a lot there with any kind of design. What is the expected behavior of the modality that you're engaging with? Okay. It's just really the congruency between sensory modalities, or how well do the senses agree with each other. At the Void, this obviously was a big deal. So that's why we had the walls there. That's why we had the physical props. And we surrounded you and all these things. That way, if you ever went to a wall that had a panel on it, the panel would be there. It would be physically there. If there was rain in the experience, then you would feel the rain, because you saw rain, you should feel rain. And all these things combined together to make these arguments In the same way of a magician passing hoop around a ball, all these things combined to make an argument to your mind that these things were real. And when you add them up, that congruency creates that perception that this is real. Okay, so we had a problem in Doctor Strange, is in the sanctum. We wanted people to walk around a lot. We wanted people to walk downstairs, and that was, believe it or not, kind of a problem, because one, we didn't want people in VR walking around or downstairs. That seemed dangerous, but we needed them to move downstairs, and so I tried different solutions. The first one I came up with that I was excited about was this. This is the outer reality. We had this railing that kind of went up at a slope, like you see here. And then in the inner reality, we tilted everything so that the railing was straight, but the ground was sloped down. The end result was that that inner reality, that virtual world that you were in, looked like you were walking down. And because if you had your hand on that railing next to you, as you moved forward, your hand would move up. Right? In the real world, that's what it would do. And in the virtual world, of course, that's what it would do. But only because you were, relatively speaking, moving down from your hand, not because your hand was moving up from you. And it worked, man. This as an effect worked great. The only problem with it was the one that Marvel had with it, which was, this doesn't make any sense. Why would anyone build like a stairway like this? It doesn't. Why would you have a handrail that moves at a constant level? Why would anyone grab it? Why? So I thought, hey, let's try something different, right? What if we did something more like this? And what if the railing was stepped and the ground was smooth, right? That way, it could be a little bit more, it would follow the slope of the ground, but your hand would still continuously be moving up or away from you as you walked. And so you would get these sort of micro impressions of you going down. This worked. It was not as effective as the regular sloped method, but it did work. And Marvel said, nope, that doesn't make any sense. Now it's just the opposite of a staircase, right? Like in a stairs, you'd have steps and then a smooth railing down. And here you've got a smooth ground, but stepped railing. It was just completely backwards. I said, all right, I got it, guys. Don't worry. Let's try this. Third attempt. Here's the outer reality. We're going to step the ground and have a smooth railing. That way, when we turn things, bam. Now we're cooking with gas. Thing is this did not work at all. It was weird. Why? I mean, yeah, it looks just like a staircase in the inner reality, but it felt wrong. Your ankles can totally tell what way your foot's pointing, turns out. So it just didn't work. I'm happy to, there's tons of stuff we tried at the Void that didn't work, and this was definitely one of them. We still need a solution. And so the final thing I came up with was this, which is kind of wild. Smooth ground, smooth railing. In the inner reality, everything was tilted, but we needed it to spiral down like a spiral, just like a spiral staircase or a spiral ramp. And in order to do that, we needed to have landings. And in order to have landings, we had to, the difference of what you felt on the railing would have to change, as you see here. So there's these, it would go down, there'd be landing, then it would go down, but there would be no adjustment no change in the railing from one landing to another. So I added these little null posts. And the point of the null post was that if your hand was on the railing, then you would go down, your hand would hit the null post, you'd have to let go of the railing, either to go on top of the null post or go to the other side of the null post, but either way, you're losing contact, and then you're back with the surface again. And just that fixed it. It allowed us to change the angle of any individual ramp as long as there was a null post there, and yet the illusion was enhanced by using the railing itself. In fact, the way that we got to use the ray was really funny, was also taking advantage of the virtual world they were in, because great, we had this solution with the null posts, but nobody was using the handrail. There didn't seem to be a need to, right? It was just a nice wide ramp that went down, and like, why would, people don't use handrails, turns out. In the real world, you should, but they tend not to. So we needed to get them to use it because it helped aid the illusion, it helped keep people on track. And so what we did was apply a little peer pressure. virtual peer pressure. So if let's say I'm the guy, there's 3 of us and I'm the guy in the middle. Well, I'm not holding the handrail, and we get to the ramp and we start going down this ramp. And there are other little tricks and stuff we could do too, but we'll cover that some other time. So you're going down the ramp, and I look in front of me, and the guy in front of me, he's holding the railing. I'm like, oh, well, I mean, that guy's holding the rail. Like, it's like, oh, he's holding the railing. I wonder if I should hold the railing. And the guy, now, if I'm not holding the railing, but the guy behind me sees both of us holding the railing. And so he's, oh, man, everybody's holding the railing. And if the person in front looks back, he sees everybody holding the railing, even if they're not holding the railing. So we made it look, from everyone's perspective, that everyone else but them was holding the railing. I mean, assuming they weren't, right? And so it created this artificial peer pressure. And our rating of how many people would hold on to that railing went up, but exponentially, I would say. I mean, it was like 3% or something when we started, and it became like 80% by the time we were done. Just by frankly tricking people into thinking that everyone else was holding onto this railing, and the effect became much more powerful, all thanks to that little relativistic trick. And again, it's in the book, I refer to them as there's covert illusions and overt illusions. And this is a covert illusion. This is an illusion people don't know is a trick. Because going down a ramp, there's nothing magical about that. There's nothing impossible about that. It only becomes weird and magical is if you see the contrast between the outer and inner reality. You go, whoa, not only am I not walking down, but I'm walking in a circle, and nobody's holding onto the railing, but then they all of a sudden, all of them did. And it's weird. It's like magical when you can see the contrast. And it's kind of the inverse of a traditional magic trick, these covert illusions. We use tons of those at the Void. Tricks to get people to align to the needed behavior of the experience without them knowing that they were being fooled, right? So the book covers tons of covert illusions. But of course, there's overt illusions as well. But we'll get to that in a minute, because one of my favorite things has to do with A-leafs. And A-leafs are a great thing to study. Magic is the art of manipulating how people think. And an A-leaf is all about understanding the automatic beliefs that a person has. Okay, which is to say, it's a term coined by Tamar Gendler. It's you could read it, a mental state of mind, blah, 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 but it's really an automatic belief, okay, an A-leaf. It's just something you automatically believe without even having to think about it, okay? Manipulating how people think can be really hard, because like their conscious process, everybody's a little bit different, everyone's had a different life. But if you can skip the part where we have to psychoanalyze them and just go deep down, most people are the same. All people don't like being at the edge of buildings. Some people have gotten used to it, but most of us, yeah, it's kind of scary being on a ledge where death is imminent if we just shift our weight forward. How do we tap into those automatic beliefs? And that's what we should look into, because there's a lot of power there. So some of the examples, they've done studies where, let's say you had 2 cups of juice, and one of them is labeled poison, and the other one is labeled tasty treat. Okay, and you saw a pitcher pour one into both, like the same drink, same juice into both cups. The studies have been done show that people are far more likely to just pick up the one that says tasty treat than the one that says poison, even though they know it's the same. Consciously, they know it's the same, but their A-leaf is still like, don't drink poison. You want the tasty treat, don't drink the poison. Professor Gendler thinks that it's the same thing that affects us when we're in movies and we're really immersed in a story and the killer appears on screen and is like scary. It's that sense of immersion where we know everyone's an actor. We know that this was all filmed with a film crew. We know that there is no actual danger here, and yet there's a sense of danger and a sense of that sense of fear that people get. And her thought is that this is part of the A-leaf system that is being accessed. Like same thing with fudge. It's a silly experiment. I can't believe scientists did this experiment, but they did. they found that if they gave away free fudge, and if they had fudge that was put into a dog feces mold, and who made that mold, I don't know. But if they put fudge in a dog feces mold, nobody wanted the one looked like dog feces, turns out, which makes perfect sense, except for the fact that, of course, it really is just fudge. But it's like a very powerful, like, no way am I eating that. And studies have found that it's beyond just the conscious, like, oh, that'd be kind of weird to eat. It's like, no, there's something inside you that doesn't want you to do that. So you can take advantage of these A-leaves, as well as belief discordant A-leaves, which is an A-leaf that contradicts a belief. Okay, the one we used the most at the Void was heights, and it was great, and we would use it at the beginning of a lot of experiences. Why? Because when you tap into an A-leaf like this, and frankly, heights is just the easiest one for most adventure type experiences, which is what we did. You get to skip the part where you have to make them believe that they're in your world. So in Jumanji, we started on a cliffside. You're in a treehouse type thing, and then you step out, and you can get this big establishing shot of the Jumanji Valley, and you are at the same time a little threatened because you are way up on a sheer cliffside, and so people will back up and kind of hug the wall. And they just do this automatically, right? They know they've got all this equipment on them. They know they're not in that world, but it doesn't matter, because we've got to skip over the part where we have to make them believe it, because they A-leave that they're there. And so it feels so much more real to them, because we access that A-leaf and skip the part where we have to just try and convince them that they're there. So they're pretty awesome. There's lots of different kinds. Haunted houses are like A-leaf machines, right? I mean, they're all the scary ones, right? Like playing off of common phobias and things like that. But an A-leaf doesn't have to even be just just something scary. It can actually be something very peaceful. It can be something very cathartic. You can use A-leaves to create beautiful moments. This was a valley. It was another heights moment. But when we felt a little more, I would say, well, definitely more safe, because it wasn't such a narrow ledge that you were on. And I'll never forget, people would show up at this moment, and it was just this, and it's, I mean, you can see from the graphics, like, this is how it used to look. It got better looking over the years, but this is kind of how it originally looked. And it wasn't like some gorgeous, this is like, say, Xbox 360 style graphics. Like, it wasn't anything fancy when we first started. But it was a good moment for people. They got this sort of a peaceful sort of release in this part right here. I remember Eliza Dushku coming to the Void, and she sat down here, and we used to have actually a ledge that you were next to, and she kind of dangled her feet over the ledge and just sort of sat there, hanging out in this valley for a while, and it created this really nice moment. They can also be a problem, so you have to be careful with them. If you use too many belief discordant A-leaves, or you use them in the wrong way, then they'll pull people out of the experience, which is not something, obviously, that you want. So you just be careful with that. It goes into the concept that subverting expectations is always a good thing, which when dealing with immersion is definitely not true. Okay, let's talk a little bit about Nicodemus. I said haunted houses are good A-leaf machines. Nicodemus was no exception. This was something that we worked on with Ninja Theory. This was something Tracy, my father Tracy Hickman, and I wrote together. And the goal was not to make some just horror show, or even necessarily true haunted house with just a ton of jump scares, but to make something that had a rich environment, that was very exploratory, but had a lot of almost Hitchcockian sort of tension, this atmosphere. And so awesome experience. Very few people, honestly, I think have actually seen it. As the Void gets going again, though, I definitely recommend checking it out sometime. It was the one where we put in the most magical moments, had the most use of A-leaves, and really transported you into this world of being at the abandoned World's Fair in Chicago, with a supernatural creature roaming around. after you. So it was a really good experience for that kind of a thing. Okay, so how can you learn more about magic and immersive design? Study and practice, years of it, or read some books and just work on it slowly, like I did. But these are the books that I like to recommend the most. I did put my book on there because honestly, there's the only book in the world like it. So what else am I going to do? But there's also these other books that I think are great. Experiencing the Impossible by Gustav Kuhn is fantastic. A lot of great work in there. I personally, especially as a magician, I love Designing Miracles and Strong Magic. Both are books by Darwin Ortiz. You can find those on Amazon or at any magic shop. They're great. And they cover magic theory. We were talking earlier on before we started the lecture about how today anybody can learn magic tricks. You can go on YouTube and Google magic tricks, and you will have more magic tricks to learn than you have time in the rest of your life to actually practice. But you can find very little on really truly understanding magic theory and how to apply it. And that's a problem because tricks are tricks, right? There's a lot of people that know a lot of tricks. There are very few people that really know how to do magic. And it's if you ask me, and it's a controversial subject, a little bit of a plague today, that we're turning out more tricksters than we are magicians. People that know how to do flashy things that look really good on camera and on Instagram, but don't really understand how to create the same level of deception and showmanship and all the wonderful tools that some of the magicians of the past have been able to accomplish. So anyway, I highly recommend these books if you're interested in magic and illusion design and more in experience design. As far as practice goes, man, how do you get into this? I think that first try using the Tysec method. I think that can be great. A great way of if you're a beginner at experience design, it's a great way to get going. Also, though, if frankly, if you've done this for years, definitely check it out because the tool is designed to work with your level of experience. And then as far as magic goes, I think the first thing that would be really good to do is, one, learn some magic theory. Two, to practice, go find like a beginner's book on magic or go find one of those YouTube videos. Learn the trick, perform it, and then say, how can I abstract this concept into something that I'm designing, whether that's for XR or whether that's for something else. There's a lot of there's a lot of AR and mixed reality design going on right now, and man, there's some great potential for some cool tricks to be done there, where you, especially as rendering gets better and better and better, we're going to be able to use these magic principles to do things that just haven't been done before. And I've seen a few experiments in this way, but it's like you can put something on a table in front of you that then gets hidden and disappears. That physical prop then can disappear and then move somewhere else and then reappear back where it was. And honestly, there's a lot that can be done by taking augmented reality and using compositing to hide things and move things and make things float, and then trick the user into creating these really cool impossible moments. So I'm excited for the overt illusions that are going to be capable through XR design as things advance and move forward. Yes, so that's it. I rushed a little bit because I wanted to try and hit time, but thank you guys so much. That's the lecture part of this. And yeah, we can jump into questions and comments and everything else.
Yeah, anyone has any questions, feel free to post. If you are on LinkedIn Live, feel free to post on the comments. If you are on Zoom with us, feel free just to unmute yourself or raise your hand if too many people are doing at the same time. Feel free to do it. Yeah, go ahead.
I think something that's interesting is my background is computer vision. And one of the ways that you learn, so the human visual system is basically the best visual system that we have access to. In recent years, computers have become better at vision than humans in some areas. But the way that you learn the most about the human visual system, for example, is to look at visual illusions. You learn the most about a system when you see how it breaks down. And I think what you're describing with magic is a very similar thing. We're learning how we perceive things by seeing how those perceptions break down. What do you think of that?
I love that. Yeah, I mean, it's this idea that to understand something, you need to kind of see through it and understand how all the parts connect and how they all work together in order to create sort of the end goal. There was a magician named Fitzky who was the first that I really know of that tried to dissect magic in a way that could almost be algorithmically used to not just understand magic, but to try and create new magic. And it was a very innovative thing for the time. He had a system called the trick brain, where he had lists of how effects worked, lists of how of different subject models, and then lists of the different classifications of magic, things like vanish, levitation, disappearance, penetration, etc. And then he would try to have the system randomly generate. He just used playing cards to do it, an end result, and use that as a way to try and brainstorm different experiences. And then recently I tried to take his work, and I just literally took his entire system from his book, and I put it into a GPT, and had the GPT actually run through the system, augmenting it as it went. And it was really fascinating to see what was possible, even with just that limited system. This is from back like in the 50s, and what was capable there. And I like the idea of being able to continually see and dissect and look into magic more and more and more, in order to design and create new effects. Because I really do believe in that concept of taxonomies and the breaking down of what are artistic principles into actionable sort of guidelines. And none of it needs to restrict art, right? It's just a way of understanding different aspects of it so that hopefully art can grow even more.
Yeah, I think it's fascinating how we can use these facilities like ChatGPT to simulate various things. And just at the drop of a hat, they will pick up on this stuff and create fascinating simulations.
Definitely.
Anybody else have questions or comments? John?
Any questions? So far, I haven't seen the linking one. By the way, we have about 35 people, both on LinkedIn and also on the Zoom. So yeah, so I'm moderating. And David, if you have any questions, feel free to unmute yourself.
Sure. So I was particularly fascinated by the physical cues that you would give people in the void. And in particular, you were showing the example of the staircase, right? And then I assume that there's obviously other tricks. You were talking about the walls. I don't know how you get people to go around in circles and stuff like that. I'm just curious, did you just kind of have an aha moment when you decided to go with the staircase thing, or is there some sort of theory that you were basing it off of? How, like, in other words, I'd like to be able to design an experience, not necessarily for something like the void, but mainly something that would be a home-based type of experience. And that way you associated the physical hand movement with what it virtually felt like. How did you even know to even come up with something like that? Is it just you don't know how you did it, or was there some sort of theory that you used behind it in terms of how we interact physically with objects?
A lot of that comes back in magic. There's a lot of relativistics. So even before VR was a thing, that magicians loved using relativity, spoken in the kind of less scientific sense, to create magical effects, right? Which is to say, it's like spectator A thinks that the effect is ... Spectator B thinks the effect is ... and they're both different effects. They're both magical, but they're both different. And the reason the trick works is because spectator A thinks what he thinks and spectator B thinks what he thinks, and the audience thinks something else entirely. And so everybody thinks the effect is something else. And if they all got together later and were like, hey, wait, what did you see? Then it would be like, oh, wait, oh, that's how it worked. It's because you thought this and you thought this. Well, we thought this. But they're not going to do that. And we know they're not going to do that. And unless we're really unlucky. And so there's tons of magic that works that way, using sort of the relative perceptions of different people. And I think that was really helpful, and understanding that kind of concept is really helpful in any kind of XR design, because especially when it comes to having multiple people in an experience like that, is knowing that, relatively speaking, and that's to say that I know that in the inner reality, their perception is going to be this, but the outer reality, the perception is this, and they can be completely different things. And so manipulating the difference between those two realities, and understanding that at a high level is what allows you, I think, to kind of come up with these different weird ideas of how that difference between those outer and inner realities will create a magical moment, whether that's a magical moment to the guest or a magical moment that they don't even know is happening, right? Like a covert illusion. So it's just a frame set, it's just a mindset that you have to get into. In the book, I go over a lot of those sort of little tricks of perception, and there's a lot of different principles that we use to do that. I'll give you one. Let's see. There's this principle that I use all the time, and sometimes it's just knowing of these things that's super helpful. Let's see, this screen, yes. So maybe some of you have seen this before, but this is, you're about to see the waiting room of a science laboratory. See if you can spot the items in the room that are a little out of place. This is something from a professor of psychology, Michael Cohen, that he put up as part of a, well, we'll show it. So just see if you can spot the items in the room that are out of place. So we'll just give you a minute to process this. Did you notice that a majority of the objects changed / moved? Let's see the first image and the last image back to back. So huge difference, right, between where we started and where we ended. And I've seen this thing, I don't know, dozens of times, and I'm always still like, oh, geez, that blue blanket, I didn't even notice that. And so this is a form of change blindness. This is a continuous change blindness, but it's just change blindness. And being aware of this principle that, hey, like, this is a psychological principle that exists, that people don't notice either gradual change or interrupted change. There's different forms of change blindness, but because of it, you can do weird stuff. And so, like, when I first saw change blindness, I'm like, oh man, you could do weird stuff with that. And in Star Wars Secrets of the Empire, Lucasfilm, they were very excited to do it, but they were a little concerned because even though we used, I'd say, relatively large stages for what we do at the Void, they weren't these big epic Star Wars worlds. And one of the feedback, part of the feedback that came back from Lucasfilm was, well, these things have to be epic. They have to be Star Wars. They have to be huge, big, enormous. And I was like, great. And we had a moment at the beginning of the experience where you were on a skiff, I think they called it, which is, you can see here, that's actually kind of like what it was like. You were over a lava field. You were all standing on top of the skiff as it was moving across that lava field, and you had to go from where your ship landed over into the complex. And it was a short journey because we don't have a lot of time. We got to move people from one room to the other one, keep our throughput up and everything else, and keep the story going. But it was also one of the coolest moments in the entire experience because you felt the heat, you smelled the ash in the air, and felt the rumbling of the skiff beneath you. The hot wind was blowing past you. I mean, there's just a lot of sensory concordance going on along with this epic Star Wars vista. Great moment, but it was a short trip because we got to get you going. And so they were concerned. They were like, hey, look, this it's too short. It needs to be bigger. What could we do? So I said, hey, let's try some change blindness. And this is a really rough illustration of what it was, but essentially to be standing on the skiff, you'd have a visual obstruction come, and then the obstruction would move. And when the obstruction showed up, we would jump you forward through the scene so you could get closer to where you were going. Why? Because we wanted you to step out on the skiff and have this long journey that you needed to take, but we couldn't speed you up for that journey. We didn't want to just fly you through it because we didn't want people to get motion sick. And the faster you went, like the more ramping we had to do in order to prevent it. There was a lot of issues with just increasing the speed. So we didn't want to increase the speed, but we did want to increase the distance, but we didn't want to increase the time, right? And if you guys remember, you know, the elementary math there does not add up. That you can't do that. So we had to take out a chunk of the journey without anyone knowing. So what I'm going to show you now is the original test that we did for that experience was and VR, again, just staring at the screen and knowing what's supposed to happen, it's just really obvious. It's like, well, okay, that wouldn't fool anybody. This fooled 100% of the test subjects we put in. And we tested thresholds, and there was a breaking point, obviously. But when done within a certain threshold of that kind of a bell curve, it worked wonderfully. And it's just this. So you're flying along on your skiff. You're starting forward. You can see the tower where you're headed. We got to get over there. The ship would come in, and it might look to you perceptively that it's like, oh, the tower jumped forward, but that's actually not what happened, because if you turn around, you can see you actually did cover that distance. It's just that one of the tricks we'd use in order to make this whole thing work was we would move these rock formations with you as we cut out that sequence. That way, there was obviously no change in the environment around you. There was a little bit on the horizon, but for the most part, the things that were close to you moved with you. And so perceptively, it was just really hard to tell that anything happened. And because of that change blindness, because that ship came in, obstructed the view of that tower in front of you, just for long enough for that change to occur without you seeing it. And it solved a problem for us. Now, I think ultimately, so it worked great. Very happy with this. They were happy with it, but ultimately part of the experience changed enough that they didn't end up using the solution for the final experience. But I was actually very pleased with what we were able to kind of come up with for them at the time during rushed production. So these little things and being aware of them and playing with them are invaluable for creating these sorts of illusions.
By the way, just that was a fascinating example, that particular example of the change blindness where you showed the room changing gradually. Is there a link to that or something? That
yes.
something? If you could just throw that in the chat, I appreciate it.
No problem.
Very interesting lecture, by the way. Very interesting. Just want you to know that.
Well, thank you.
One thing that I think is very interesting is that, you know, as humans, we have this sort of focus of attention center in our brain, and it helps us to digest information. It helps us to avoid becoming overwhelmed by the amount of information that's coming in through our senses. And people who are savants don't have that same focus of attention mechanism. It can be missing. And for example, you can take someone who's like an artistic savant and fly them over London, and then they can come down and draw a perfect sketch of London, everything that's there. Whereas a normal person can't do anything like that. And there was a scientist, a researcher, who was studying this, and he found that he could put like a little cap on people with these electrodes on it, And he could focus radio waves onto that center of attention, a focus of attention mechanism in the brain, and he could send some pulses of radio waves to it and disable it temporarily. And then all of a sudden, that person would have savant-like capabilities. And in fact, they use that in training of drone operators for the US military. And they found that the speed at which they learned this process of flying drones improved. I don't particularly want to do that myself. I think of it sort of as microwaving your brain. In fact, there were a series of documentaries on TV featuring this researcher, and he would, apply this to himself. And what you would see is you would see him go through this process of like twitching every second as these pulses impinged upon his brain. And after a while, through the documentaries, you could see that he started to have just spontaneous twitching and tremors and so forth on his own. And so I don't know if it's the greatest thing to subject yourself to, but it's interesting how we've developed these various mechanisms in our brain. And I think this change detection thing is one of those mechanisms where our focus of attention is such that we're not going to pick up on all these little details like that.
Yeah, definitely. That's interesting. Yeah. Send me a link to like a paper or something on that. I think that's awesome.
I'll see if I can find something.
Yeah.
Peter, or I saw Nikki has some questions. So yeah, either two of you. Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, I was wondering if you found an upper limit on how many people you could have in an experience at the same time, and is there a theoretical upper bound?
So it's a multifaceted question, because the question is, in theory, no. In practicality, like technically, totally, right? Which is to say there's just some limits when obviously you're just, how many bodies can you stick into a small enough space? When we first started the Void, we had we took a certain space and we said, all right, let's fit, I bet we can only fit 2 people in there at a time. And that felt comfortable, felt good to do that. But it didn't make for a good economic model. And I bet, I bet you could do 3. This is when we were making Ghostbusters. And so they put a 3rd person on there and it's like, oh, that kind of worked. All right, we're okay with that. And then I was like, I mean, Ghostbusters are 4, so I bet we could do 4. And by 4 at a time, I mean just 4 in a group, not 4 on a stage. And they're like, okay, let's try it, but it won't work. And they were convinced it wouldn't work. And then we put 4 in, and all of a sudden it worked fine. Just with having, in a relatively, we had an elevator that people had to get in Ghostbusters. And the elevator was very specific. There was yes, elevators are great in VR, everybody knows that, but it's like, it was not just there to move you up. It was there because it put you in a box and allowed, again, because there's a social scaffolding that happens with an elevator where people go in, they turn around and they look out the direction that they came as the doors close and you go up, right? And it's a social thing. This is what you do, right? And they've done weird studies where people go in and they face everyone's facing the other way. And then the last guy comes in and he's like, I guess we'll all face this way. Like, he doesn't know, he just does it because everyone else is doing it, right? Really fascinating stuff. But people go in, they turn around and they look out. And so we did that so that Slimer could show up and actually you'd be in a small contained area where we knew he would hit you, and then we could hit misters so you could feel that feeling of being slimed. And so we knew exactly where you were standing and where we were looking, so that the sensory concordance would happen and you would get this really bizarre moment of, we'd hit the haptics on the front of your vest and then the back of your vest and the water. Anyway, it's a tangent, but we needed people to be in a small room in order for that to happen. And it turned out people get spatially aware very quickly, even when they had to have those big backpacks on their backs. There was they after a little bit of bumping around, they tended to get more of a sense of how much space everybody needed and how close they could get to somebody before things became too tight. And so there's a question of just like, how many bodies can you stick into space? It depends what technology you're using. And I think in an XR environment, theoretically, there's just really no limit. I mean, people, as long as your technology can keep up with it, people get spatially aware really quick. So you can put people into something shoulder to shoulder if you really wanted to. I wouldn't do it. I think that kind of defeats some of the purpose of your virtual environment. Yeah, but socially and everything else, people adapt very quickly to immersive worlds like that. As long as your tech can keep up. But if you want to know more, like, well, like how many people can you stick into a space, technically speaking, that's all stuff the Void won't let me talk about, because they kind of keep all that stuff proprietary. It's the stuff I had to skip in the book, even though there's some of that I'm very proud of, especially when it comes to throughput. The Void had I still think has the record for the highest throughput for any immersive VR experience, and I don't think people know that, which is part of what makes it magical. But yeah, hopefully that answers some weird new question.
Any
I'm
other
curious.
questions?
Yeah, I'm curious. Do you find particularly when you're doing magic, do you find that there are some people in the audience who just don't react at all the way that you would expect?
Oh yeah, definitely. And that's true of of every Void experience or magic moment I've ever made. Because people are different. And some people don't like to react to magic in a positive way, don't have a positive reaction to magic because they feel more like they've been fooled than they've been amazed, right? They feel like that they've been tricked somehow. And they don't like the feeling. And so there's people that say, I don't like magic, and it always blows my mind. I'm like, well, why not? Like, what's wrong with you? But there's this sense that some people have that they don't like that feeling. Likewise, I've seen people go in. Oh man, it was a really crazy experience once where these people went in. We were at the TED conference in Vancouver. We brought a whole Void stage. We were showing everybody, Spielberg, everybody, that our experience. It was great experience. And I remember these guys came out at the end. It was this temple, forbidden temple type experience. And at the end, the ground crumbled out beneath you and you fell into a pit. And what we did is, on our stage, one of our rooms actually dropped. The way it was built, it literally made everybody sit down for safety reasons, although it was really cool when you were just standing. But you were sitting down, and then you would see the floor crumble. And the way it worked is you would start to fall, and then as you would start to reach like the height of acceleration, like there was this real clear timing of it where it would fall away, you'd start to drop, and then we'd drop you, and we'd have air blasters in the floor shoot up, so you felt the air come up, and then and it's only like 6 inches, so you just fall a little bit, and then when you hit the ground, we push you, boom, pop you back up. And so you would have this moment where you fell, and then boom, you felt the ground push you up. And there was a distance in between those two things where nothing was happening, right? Just a little bit of air blowing. But the end result of all those moments coming together and in a relatively short period of time created this crazy moment where it was just like, it felt like you fell. And I thought it was great. That was the moment right after that happened, where Spielberg lifted up his headset and was like, now that was an awesome experience. And I was just, like, oh, hero liked it. That's good. And I thought it was awesome. And then these guys came out and they were like, I mean, if that was real, like that would have like hurt, man. You'd have like died. Like, and they were like bagging on the experience because they didn't get injured. And it was supposed to be real, bro. And how come, and I was just like, dude, you want me to kill you? Like, I don't understand. They really didn't like the experience because they didn't feel like it was real. And I was just like, I don't think you understand, like, if it was real, what that would mean. But they wouldn't accept it. They just were like, no, it just wasn't real enough for us. It just seemed so fake. And it was just interesting because to me, it's like, well, I did everything I could to make it as real as possible.
Wow.
There's just a disconnect there, which I thought was fascinating. Like I think about that story sometimes, like, all right, well, what did that person need to really make it seem more real? And how can I address that in the future? Like, what does that mean? So I find those things just really fascinating.
There was a situation one time when I was in college. I was sort of fascinated by the idea of hypnotism, and I wanted to be hypnotized. And a hypnotist came to our college, and so he had a show, and I went to it. And he would do various things, like he would walk around the room and sort of get you to anticipate being hypnotized. And, he'd say he was going to select people. And as he came by, you could sort of feel this thing happening to you. And so I wanted to be hypnotized, and he chose me. And, he went through the spiel of how I'm not going to remember what happened during the hypnotism and all that stuff. And I thought, well, I'm going to remember. And so sure enough, I remembered everything. But what is the relationship between hypnotism and magic? It seems like there's a strong connection there. I think you're muted.
Yeah, sorry, I was finding my mute button. It's hypnosis. I find hypnosis fascinating. I studied it for a while. I think, I don't know, controversial opinion. Maybe it's not controversial. I don't really know. I just don't know how people talk about it. But if you ever go to a hypnosis show, if they're a hypnotist worth their salt, then a small percentage of the people that he's claimed to have hypnotized will actually be hypnotized.
Mm-hmm.
If he's not a hypnotist worth his salt, then nobody's hypnotized. They're all just playing along.
Yeah.
But no matter what, in any hypnosis show you've ever been to, there's just people that are just like going for it, like just an excuse to act ridiculous, and they'll go for it. If you ever really want to know if someone's been hypnotized, while they're hypnotized, they'll be in REM. Their eyes will go into rapid eye movement, and that's the thing I've always used to tell if someone was actually hypnotized, is to see if they've gone into REM or not. There's probably hypnotists that disagree with me, but to me that's like the surefire sign, because people don't know that, and it's a weird thing to try to fake. So it's something to look out for. When it comes to hypnosis, the goal, is you're trying to access. Man, I have this crazy story. We don't have time to cover the story today, but like I said, I used to really be into it, and even if you're a really good hypnotist, the problem is that things like regressive memory, like, hey, we're going to go back in your mind, we're going to find memories. Like, no, you're not. You're going to go find things that their mind's making up to fill in blanks, because you're just accessing, again, it's like that REM sleep. It's just really good at making that sort of those images up and those things up, but there's no,
like the hallucinations of a chatbot.
Yeah, exactly. Totally. And I think that so I think there's a lot of cool stuff that hypnosis can be good for. I think there's a lot of interesting things that can be good for, even when it comes to psychology and medication, everything else. But it's like a weird tool when it comes to magic, because it's like, all right, am I just going to try and hypnotize the audience and be like, all right, you guys just saw the coolest show ever, and then just sit there for 2 hours while I wait for the time to burn out? Like that's not going to happen. And so it kind of gets relegated into the place that it is, of we're going to entertain the audience by having people do silly things and using hypnosis to this sort of very reductive form that is partly hypnosis, partly just people being ridiculous. And I don't know. It's funny. I have a lot of thoughts on this, but ultimately what it comes down to is I stopped actually studying and going into hypnosis because I felt like there was more value in psychological manipulation where people were conscious of what was happening and had their free agency and had more autonomy, and where it, frankly, weirdly enough, seemed more real than through hypnosis. So I think those two things of, people always think, oh, there's got to be a lot of hypnotists at Magic Convention. No. I mean, there's guys like me that know about it, but mostly those two worlds are far more separated than you might think.
Interesting. It's another one of those things, I think, where you learn about a system by seeing how it breaks down. And I guess that's what fascinated me about hypnotism, was what's really going on with it.
Yeah, I like waking hypnosis. I think there's a lot to be learned from that too, especially just that this concept of being able to manipulate people. And I say manipulate people as if like some puppet master, but they're conscious of what's happening. It's just a matter of being able to use language to do things while they're completely awake that seem magical or strange, because they're just accessing part of part of their mind that is susceptible, and advertisers do it, and you know, it's just part of life, and it helps us, like you say, when you understand those things better, you can understand sort of a lot more of the world around you, I think.
We did have a question by Daniel. It says, I'm curious if Curtis will dissect the last magic show he went to.
I like using dissect as a verb there. That's kind of fun. Yeah, it's interesting. A lot of magic shows are poorly done. And again, I would say no offense to my art, but I almost kind of hope they take offense. Because there's so many magic shows that are nothing more than just a menu of tricks and aren't good experiences, right? If you want to see what, frankly, I think a good magic show is, if you haven't seen it yet, in and of itself on Hulu, great magic show. Go check that out. That's an immersive experience. That's something you could take the dissect method and break it apart and understand it, and how it applies. I've met Derek Delgadio, great, brilliant guy, and doing good things for the art. So I'm happy with that. A lot of other magic shows you see, and there's nothing wrong with it. It's just kind of a variety of little magical impossible moments. Sometimes that's all people need. I used to do table hopping at restaurants, and that's what I would do. I'd show up at a table, let's do a trick, let's do another trick, let's do another trick, and look, a lemon appeared. Good night, you know, and that's all people really cared about or wanted. They don't want to hear about like my childhood trauma while they're trying to, you know, snack on their appetizer and have a good night, right? But at the same time, there's so many just professional magic shows that don't care about the immersive value of the experience itself. Another amazing magic show that I went to that I loved was Secret on Broadway. This is the Darren Brown mentalism show, and man, just I loved that show. That had a story thread, and while it was a collection of effects, as most magic shows of course are, even in and of itself, is that it was all put together through a theme. It was all put together and had brilliant moments of scaffolding and all these sort of things we've talked about before. Yeah, and I mean, it's funny that you say magic shows, because specifically because they are, I think, one of the theater forms that needs more of that. Frankly, probably I'm sure more do too. Like there's a lot of variety shows and things that could use that dissect sort of manner of thinking in order to help improve their story and their foundation to make a better experience for the spectators.
Dominique, do you see any other questions?
Oh, I think Nikki has a question, right?
Yep. So my background is in visual design for traditional e-learning experiences. And I've been a huge fan and advocate of XR ever since I put my first Oculus Quest headset on in 2019 and was just totally blown away. And my personal passion is for creating opportunities for joy, play, empathy, and just general human connection and wellness. And around the same time that my interest in XR was growing, I also had the opportunity to be lead design for a project called Nonviolence 365 for the King Center, run by Dr. Bernice King. And this program is all about empathy and the beloved community. And I could just really see the ways in which an educational program like this could truly benefit from VR or just immersive experiences in general. And so I guess I'm curious, in what ways do you feel like magic theory can be applied to immersive experiences for education and wellness?
That's a great question. Wellness, I think illusion design is especially like really, there's a lot of good that can be done there. I mean, again, if your goal is to help transport people or take them out of one reality and help put them into another one, then there's a very clear correlation that can be used in the wellness sector, especially when it comes to people whose realities need reframing. Right. there was a time I went through where I had a lot of anxiety. My daughter had gone to the hospital with a life-threatening issue, and I developed this sort of severe anxiety and kind of from it. But everything turned out fine, but it was sort of after that, when she was fine, that all of a sudden I felt like, man, at any moment anything could go wrong, because that is true, and that's part of the problem, right? Is that, like, look, at any moment anything could go wrong. And when you have that part of your brain that's just like, hey, that insulates you from that fact, when that wears thin, man, the world gets really bleak. And so being able to step out of my reality and be able to reframe things, be able to see things in a different way, and be immersed in different realities was very, frankly, therapeutic, and helped me to kind of rebuild that insulating barrier and help reframe my reality. I think there's a lot of good that can be done through education in that same way, and immersion is key in order to do that, in order to help people see things from a different way, whether or not it convinces them of the new way or not. It's the best way, I think, for people to if you want someone to understand a different reality, then let's present them with a realistic reality that can help them see it from that point of view, right? There's a TED Talk that it was one of the TED Talks where I was at TED, and it was actually given, that talked about VR as the last medium. And I actually talk about in the book, and my hyperreality book, about how I don't think that's true. I think there's still one more step after that, but it's getting close. But just because it's, there's this idea that you could tell someone you tell someone a story, and you could draw that story on a wall in a cave, and then eventually you can, like, make fine art and make statues, and trying to convince, like, hey, I went on a hunt and I caught this mastodon. Eventually you're carving a statue. This is what he looked like, and so people can see what that mastodon looked like in 3D. And then eventually that method of communication and storytelling kind of expanded, and it's like to radio. Now you can tell that story to, like, a lot of people. And then there was film and photography. It's like, this is a picture of, when I hunted him, this is what happened. And I don't know why you're hunting mastodons, but whatever. That story gets more and more and more until you have, like, film, and it's like, here's a film of me doing it, and television that was being broadcast to everybody. And so this communication gets further and further and further, until the point where it's like, nope, I was there, I was the one hunting. Yeah, this is Chris Melk, by the way. This is a TED Talk by Chris Melk. If Dominic's looking it up, that's you can find it. And it was a really cool talk, and worth looking at. And I do think there's probably one more step beyond that, but we have to talk about that now. But the point is that when it comes to having people understand and really having them live the communication that you're trying to convey is very powerful. And then using magic principles as a way to help immerse them is just a way to further that education, because the more they're in that environment, the more likely it is that they'll feel a part of it and will be able to understand it. So that goes into immersion, which is a whole, like, another hour of chatting. There's a ton about immersion, of course, in the book, and how magic principles are used to help create immersion. A-leaves is just one of the techniques that I use. I like it because it's just a weird one, but there's different aspects that can be used to help create immersion, and magic techniques to help do that as well. So, long answer to say, tons. I think there's a lot that magic can do to help those areas.
Thanks so much for that answer. That, like, seriously blew me away. I really feel like I never thought about magic theory connected to creating immersive experiences, and I'm just like, I think everyone that is involved in creating anything of the sort should learn magic theory, not only for creating better experiences for the users, but also just for ourselves. Like, I think there's just so much that we can learn about ourselves as humans, just learning more about this magic theory that you're talking about. So thank you.
My pleasure.
Can you recommend some books regarding to, like, the immersive using magic tricks for the immersions?
So, I mean, this is really self-serving, but the only book I know of that does that right now is mine.
Okay, I've already kind of put a lot of links, yeah, for your book. And the
It's-
other question, okay, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, it's one of the reasons why I wrote it is because I didn't feel like there was a lot of material out there that really specifically addressed that particular aspect. And it felt like something that needed to be shared. I wrote it during the pandemic. I'm like, oh, the void's going down, which it was. All our locations closed. It was not good for business. And so I started writing, and it was not a short book. Like, it is kind of a bit of a long book, but I just sort of detailed everything I could about what I knew about it that the void would let me do, which turns out frankly a lot. And I got to applaud them that they were actually willing to let me do that at all, because they didn't have to. But they were kind enough to let me write all that. So if you're really interested in magic and XR and immersive and experience design, like, I would just start with that book and just see what I had to say about it. And then once you kind of understand how I look at it, then when you read books like Darwin Ortiz's books mentioned earlier, it'll be a lot easier to see how you can abstract what he's talking about, which he always applies, of course, to magicians, but you can abstract those concepts easily to other forms of design. For example, he talks a lot about like time dilation, which is a beautiful method of not just of fooling people, because people tend to think and look for specific ways of analyzing any circumstance, right? So proximity, both in place and in time, is a huge one that people use to try and understand any circumstance, right? Like, I got sick last night. Well, what did I eat? Not what did I eat a year ago? What did I eat for dinner last night that might have made me sick? Right? And or well, it wasn't the food. Well, who was I with? Now, who was I with a year ago? Who was I with last night? It was something happened somewhere close to me physically. And so you know that. And so then you can say, all right, I'm going to create, I need to distort reality in some way. And I want to use that. So I'm going to distort when it happened, when the method happened, or where the method happened. Because everyone's going to think the method or the happens close to the effect, because that's what makes sense. So the coin disappeared. Well, what happened right before the coin disappeared? Okay, well, if the answer is that right before the coin disappeared, the magician had me close my eyes, like, then there's no trick there, right? On the other hand, it's like, well, the magician put the coin in his hand, and then right before the coin disappeared, he blew on his hand. That messes with your head, because you know that blowing on something isn't a valid method, but that's what happened right before the coin disappeared, right? And you're not thinking about a minute ago when he dumped the coin into the hand, when it was just a false transfer, right? And the coin wasn't in the hand at all, and it hasn't been in the hand for quite some time, right? So anyway, that's just the kind of principles that you will learn about in the Darwin Ortiz books. I don't really go into that deep because he's already done it. But it provides a real sense of kind of those abstract concepts, and he'll apply them directly to magicians, but you'll be able to take those and apply them in other ways.
I think it's interesting that when you talked about, for example, the experience with your daughter, I had an experience one time. I was driving into work. I got in a car accident. I was just sitting there, and there was like a chain reaction type of accident that occurred. And what surprised me is that for a while after that, every time I went through that intersection, going to work, I was very surprised. I would feel like a sense of panic. And I'm not a person subject to panic attacks or anything like that. And it was just all the cues of that situation sort of created a state of hypervigilance within me. And one of the things, I don't know if we're quite ready for this as a society, but I wonder if having the ability, for example, to create perhaps an immersive experience on the fly through one of these large language models, if people could use that to sort of work through situations, like you're talking about trying to figure out what made you sick from last night. I wonder if people could immerse themselves in a situation that caused them problems and sort of sit there and ask questions about the situation. Why did this part of it happen? What caused this? And so forth, and sort of work their way through these problems. Maybe chatbots are a little bit too scary right now to have psychologists think about that.
Yeah, it's funny, I talk about a lot of AI stuff toward the very, very end of the book, because I do think there's a lot, of course, there. I wrote that. What's interesting is I wrote I wrote the last part of the book, which talks about the future, of immersive design first. This is the first chapter I wrote, and ended up putting it in the back of the book because it just felt wrong to start with the future. And so I wrote that right before like all the ChatGPT stuff, like where before the AI really started to take off as being a big thing. And so I was like delighted to see it as it sort of appeared, because there is so much that can be done with that stuff. And I like the idea that and I like the idea of thinking positively about this, because frankly there's so much negativity around it, around what could be a wonderfully valuable technology if as a people we learn how to adapt with it and work with it, for things just like that, for things that of ways that can help people overcome problems and grow and be strengthened in ways that just talking about it never really could. Because now it's like, we don't have to pay a studio $10 million to make them an experience just to help them with their one issue, right? AI can help build it for them, and with them help them work out their stuff. Like, I love that kind of a future. Like, that would be great. And you incorporate the principles of immersive design and illusion theory into that, and all of a sudden they're really immersed in it, and it's impactful, and it helps them move forward. Like, that's the kind of future I want to live in.
We did have some questions in the chat. One from Peter about, he says, is the Void back, and are you still part of it?
The Void is back in the sense that there are investors, that we have a location where we do our work, and have stages running, and we're still, I think the investment is still a concern, not just for frankly us, but like for just about everybody right now. So that's something they're still working on, is kind of working through some of the investment the work around it. But there's a group of core investors that wanted to bring it back after it went down, and so they called me up. It was just like, a few months after it closed, and I still really like the Void, and I still really love what they stood for. I had a few conditions, where I was like, look, if we're going to come back with the Void, I don't want to just do exactly what we did before. I want to go back to this concept where we're doing large scale experiences, and we're kind of, again, I'd rather push the envelope than try to reduce it into something. And they were okay with that. So I was like, great, but I get to say great, because as the chief creative officer and creative director, like I'm interested in creating art and creating magical experiences for people. I want to work with throughput. I want to work with making money. That's sure. Like, that's fine. I'm happy to play the game. But I'm not responsible ultimately, for some of those things. Which frankly is just a great position to get to decide to be in, we are the music makers, we are the dreamer of dreams. Like, I always want to be that guy.
Nikki was curious if you teach any online courses in magic theory.
It's funny, I've been asked that. Not yet. I haven't had the time to do anything like that, but I love the idea of doing it. I've always wondered if there'd be enough demand, I think, for it. So maybe at some point in the future.
Well, and she adds, and XR experience design. So maybe there is a market for that. Maybe Dominique, maybe he could have a little course through your academy.
Yes, that's what I want to bring up, because we tie the paid workshop to hackathon. So right now we are reaching out to some very interesting startup and fully funded, and they have some AI platforms or XR platforms. We are still Lily already compiled a list of interesting potential sponsor. And right now, Ultraleap is very interested in working with us, and also another company. I forgot the name of the company, but I know the person that I know is Rach. He has like a motion capture suit, and recently they have some AI stuff, and they are interested in exploring the hackathon possibilities, and also Mozilla Hub. and we are still in the process of talking to Walmart. Not sure who will be locked down, but there are a lot of potential that we can maybe if you are interested, we can talk more and we do revenue share with the teachers, and then we can pair up with the hackathon and make the workshop impactful. Yeah.
Cool. The
Cool.
time right now is the biggest issue, but that you never know. You never
Yeah,
know.
you never know. And yeah, my question is that now the Void is VR based. If later on it's strong comeback, would you kind of integrate some mixed reality? Because for example, like Cubism, I recently interviewed Cubism developer Thomas, and he was changing entire Cubism VR into mixed reality. And also he is working on laser dance, which he was mapping out different types of rooms and doing the laser from the walls, mixed reality. So I think, wow, this is like, and he was so excited about the entire mixed reality possibility. He thinks that, oh, the entire table can be interactive. And he wished that, for example, like when he pressed something and there are some feedbacks, or the entire kitchen becomes some organism that can understand you. So yeah, I think the Void has like a very interesting way that hyper reality, and I'm wondering if mixed reality, this types of device or Vision Pro or Quest 3 is like a part of, I don't know, like a potential integration. Yeah.
Yeah, when it's kind of one of those things where it's like we always wanted mixed reality to be a thing. We had to make our own backpack, we had to make our own battery solution, we had to make our own BIOS. I mean, we started so early in this. HP didn't have a backtop computer, so we made one. There wasn't a good solution for a headset, so we made a deal with Meta and then Facebook, and took the guts of Oculuses and put them into our own headsets and combined them with other technology of our own to make these sort of really cool but expensive headsets that could work in an environment, like commercial environment. And on and on and on. And it was just very expensive because we were constantly developing new hardware, which was only being amortized out across a handful of locations. So it was it was difficult as we were like, man, it'd be great if we could put another camera or two cameras on the headset, and then we could do some MR stuff, because we wanted to bring the experience. The further we can bring it out from the stage, right, as we do that pre-show, it's like now the pre-show is not just it's still in a pre-show room, but now we can actually augment that pre-show room and the guest journey from the second they get that headset on, to help immerse them and gradually carry them into the experience, what we call the path of conviction. And so it was always something we wanted to have happen, and now that it is happening, it's super exciting for us, because we love the idea of pulling the experience out further and further and further, including even ways of bringing the experience home, and like you say, I mean, using mixed reality in the home in some really cool ways. So we've been exploring a lot of those types of things lately. It's just sort of a matter of which path we end up taking, some of which will depend on investors, some of which sort of depends on the powers that be. But hopefully we'll be able to make some really cool announcements along those lines in the near future.
I'm sort of curious. There's these big companies that are doing a lot of work in headsets and so forth. And it seems like sometimes they sort of miss key aspects of the designs of what they're doing and screw things up. And I'm just wondering, you don't have to tell us who if you're involved in this, but I'm just wondering if anyone has approached you and said, hey, could you help us with these designs and help us to improve things so that it's a better solution?
I do consulting, and not all the time, but when I depending on the client and who they are, I'll do some consulting. I've I don't know, for some really cool people and big names and big places, and there's definitely a lot of I mean, there for people that really grasp, I think, the concepts behind the stuff I'm talking about, there's a need in the industry for this kind of work. The funny thing is that I still think today, even a lot of places don't know they need it.
Yeah.
And so it's funny because I get here and I evangelize these sort of concepts, and hoping in a way that the industry can sort of move and understand, like, oh no, what he's talking about, oh wait, we're missing that. Like, that's a thing that actually is needed. So hopefully I get to accomplish a little bit of both, where, you know, inspiring people to use these design concepts, because I think we'll all be better for it, but also just sort of shining a light on a space that is a bit lacking.
Yeah, sometimes I'll see a product and that I'm interested in, that I might be interested in developing for, and I just wonder, how on earth did they miss this? You know?
Yeah, totally.
Cool. I saw Nikki has a lot of questions. Nikki, do you wanna ask questions?
Sorry, I just get so excited about this. I don't know if I really have any other questions per se, but like what Jim was saying about particularly like larger corporations kind of missing this aspect. I feel like my role at Ernst & Young doesn't particularly involve anything with XR, but I'm very heavily involved in like their metaverse and tech and innovation communities. And this is something that I've just kind of noticed on my own is kind of missing in the excitement around XR. I think there's a lot of focus on more just like very practical applications, but it doesn't really seem to, I don't know, get the communities as excited as I feel like they should be. So I'm always just trying to like share whatever resources I find to like show people like the real true power behind it. And like so yeah, just like this whole talk has just gotten me very excited. I'm like, oh, more exciting things to share with people. That it's, you know, it's not, you know, just all, you know, boring and straightforward. There's so many like opportunities for joy, to create joy for the users, but also just to enjoy it as a creator. So anyways, yeah, thank you.
Yeah, no, thank you. That's fantastic. Oh, I love that. There is one other thing I wanted to share before we ran out of time, only because it was asked me earlier, and I don't even think the person who asked about it is I don't know if they're still here or not. Oh wait, but David has a question, and I don't want to leave him out. So
Well, it'll be quick, and you can tell me if you can have a quick answer to it, and if you can get to your point. Basically, I've noticed that when I create VR experiences and people are going through the tutorial, sometimes they're not looking at whatever I'm trying to teach them. They're looking around at the environment. And they're not, and you know, as a magician, I'm sure you know the art of having to get people to look where you want them to look. What do you do in situations like that in VR when people aren't looking where they're supposed to be?
great question. So the cool thing about misdirection is that because it is not about directing away, it's about directing towards. Misdirection is kind of my go-to thing for stuff like that, and it's very simple concepts that it's like obviously help, but in the void, for example, if there's something that they have to do, we have these very specific rules to help guide the user. And at first, because the void's about discovery and not about like walking them through something, we get to sort of back off and to say, all right, they need to discover it. Then if they don't discover it, then we need to suggest. And then if they don't still get to it, then we need to tell them. And so media apathy and people sort of being overwhelmed in an XR environment and not looking or doing kind of what you need them to do is always a challenge. Because when we get to that tell part, that's where it's like, all right, you look here, do this, and move on, because we got to keep our throughput up, we got to get the experience going. But I don't want to say that, obviously. It kind of goes back to original design principles of things like color, contrast, focus, and etc. Right? It's like directing them. So you know, we've done everything from where, for example, in Nicodemus, they'll walk across in an area, and then we will collapse the room behind them, which creates this really cool sort of A-leaf moment. But it also limits their play space to that section, but it does it in a diegetically appealing way, one that fits the story. And so now they're limited to that play area. And there are only 2 interesting things in that play area. So I mean, the environment's amazing, but they've seen the environment. And as they walk into that area and the room collapses, the environment darkens naturally. Nobody notices. And the machine that they're supposed to access lights up, turns on. And again, all this is done in a way that I would say is subtle enough that people don't go, well, okay, that's what, it's done in a way that is just subtle. So it creates focus on the machine. Still, there will be people that won't go and interact with the machine. And in the void, there's nothing there's not too much I can do about that, because they don't, in this particular case, they don't have to. It's just more fun, right? If they actually realize there's physical machine here that they can manipulate and do things with. And I want them to have fun. That's what they paid for. So please go have fun. But then at some point we do have to get them out of the room. And so a plank falls and collapses, and that motion draws attention. And then the lighting in the room shifts, and so they can see that log, and then a door opens up, more motion. And because motion obviously just draws attention. And so we're constantly using sort of the story in order to create these moments of attention, right? I'm not sure exactly what your use case is, right? But let's say it was a tutorial trying to get somebody to use a UI, right? Then it's like, hey, we need you to look at this button. And so it's like, great, I'm going to have that button be huge and then like fade in multiple times, creating a lot of motion to that button, right? Instead of just circling it or something, it's just like, I'm going to create a big motion that's going to draw that attention. It's like, this is where you need to be looking, right?
What if they're looking the wrong way? What if they're looking behind them and they don't even see the button? That's usually what people do, because they're like, ooh, that's something pretty behind me.
Yeah, but what is it? What's pretty behind them that they're looking at?
It's just the environment. It's a time travel game, so they're sometimes looking at the remainder of the era that they're in. They're just looking around.
Gotcha. So is it like in the middle of the experience that this would be happening, or is it?
It's in the tutorial, but yeah, they suddenly get plopped into an era and they're just looking around and they're just not looking at what I want them to look at. So
I mean, but I like, could you diegetically explain it away, like that the interface or whatever is like that, like by fading the environment darker, except for the area that they're supposed to be looking. I mean, there's just a lot of it just depends on your story, which thing you need to use in order to help carry that across, right? Because it's just like, all right, is it appropriate to just like darken the, like there was in Ghostbusters, if people started walking the wrong way, literally, I mean, there'd be a door that was shut. And if they decided to walk through that door because it's VR, we can do what we want, the entire environment went black. Because I'm like, look, you broke the rules of my environment, so black it goes, because you decided to walk through that window. And that's just how it is. Or if they tried to jump into or over a pit, that, like, in theory, they could have jumped over that gap that I'd created Nicodemus, but there is no jumping in the void. So if they tried to, then all of a sudden that's when a grid would come up and be like, nope, you're not doing that, and go back, because I wasn't having it. They were breaking the rules of my experience. And so I guess my only advice is like, you need to create a rule in your experience that allows you diegetically to create something that will make that focus work no matter what direction they're facing, right? Because if they're facing the wrong way, but it's part of the tutorial, then holographic arrows are coming up that are like going to turn them around toward that arrow, right? Or whatever is, again, diegetically appropriate for your experience, whatever whatever conceit that you can use to make that happen.
Perhaps sound as well, if you have spatial sound.
Yeah. It's a big question.
Okay, so you were gonna tell a story about something before you were gonna wrap up, so I didn't know what that was. I didn't want to stop you.
I was gonna talk, like, I mean, most of you probably know it. I guess I talk about it all the time. It has to do with the infinite hallway. It's just another, but I thought I'd just bring it up really quick at the end, just because it is fun. If you've already seen it, go ahead and drop off and run to lunch or whatever you're doing. But just for those of you who've never seen it before or are curious, I thought I'd talk about it just briefly. Because it is something that we use and are using today to help guide people in an experience and to keep people within a contained space, even though it's an infinite world. And it's simply this, which is placing people into this hallway. It's a circular hall, right? Big round hallway. And that dot, that's you. But what we show them is a straight hallway. And so virtually that's what they see. And then as they start moving forward, we rotate that virtual world, that straight hallway around their central position, which subconsciously makes them start to walk in a circle, walk around the arc. Now, the crazy thing about this is that there's physical walls on either side of them. And if they put their hand on the wall, because they're walking in an arc, they don't feel that the wall is curved. They feel like it's straight. So this doesn't just work visually, it works tactily. And because of that, you're able to have somebody walk indefinitely down a straight hallway, which is in fact this sort of orbiting hallway around the experience. This allows people to step in and out of a room, go down a hallway, step into a different room, and it's just the same room again, over and over and over again, using this and various principles in order to create this sort of an expansive universe. And again, it's very magical. We used to actually do a demo where people would step into this infinite hallway. They'd walk around the infinite hallway, and then we'd have them take their goggles off and say, okay, look down the hallway where you were. And then they can't see where they were because they're looking around an arc. And it was just the most confusing moment in the world for these people. And I loved it. It was like a magic trick, but a very practical one that we use in experiences to keep people contained through redirected walking, a very specialized form of it. So anyway, there's just a lot of fun stuff out there. Just another one.
I saw there's one last question from Gigi. She said that if I am that person in the void, was I supposed to flip that switch? I can be in a whole group of those people. I feel visually dense a lot of times. And also she mentioned that how to design, okay, this one. How do you think about universal design stuff, such as different, everybody has different, for example, somebody has colorblind, low vision, and couldn't see the blue button. How the void can solve this problem?
The void solution was, and I'm not sure at what stage this got implemented or not before it closed, but was to actually just create those affordances for the guest. So if you were colorblind, what colorblind are you? All right, we'll toggle that for you, and you can go in. We even had blind people go into the void. I remember we had a father, mother, and their son was blind, just completely blind. And I only know all this because they wrote me a letter after that was awesome, because he went through the experience, and the dad kept trying to like, oh no, this is what's happening. He's like, I know what's happening, because he could hear it and he could feel it, and it was enough for him to understand the stories they went through. And I loved that. Like I loved that, because we were providing so many affordances from reality that it didn't rely solely on the visual for him to have a good experience. So I've never forgotten that.
Cool. Any other last thoughts? Any questions? Last one. Yeah. Well, yeah. Thank you so much, Curtis, and I will follow up with you. Oh, okay. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.